You're listening to the new WCEG Network on WCEG talkradio.com. Click live stream tab or watch us live on your smart TV. YouTube, WCEG Network. I'm Dr. Wanzo, your show host of Mind Matters for the next 90 minutes. We're the worldwide community empowerment group where we speak life into the community. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and on Instagram at WCEG_talk_radio and at WCEG Network. Last but not least, the topics and opinions are those of the show hosts and guests and not WCEG Network. Thank you for your continued support. Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Mind Matters, where we discuss relevant mental health issues. I'm your host, Dr. Cassandra Wanzo, a psychiatrist practicing in the Atlanta area for 29 years. Our co-host is Officer Paul DesVignes, who has more than 20 years experience in law enforcement. Hi, Paul. I don't think he has his audio on. Paul, okay.
I hear you.
Oh, you hear me? Hi, Paul. Hi, Paul. Okay. We're affectionately known as the Doc and the Cop. Our guest co-host is Norman Carter Jr. Norm is a retired Philadelphia police corporal. He has written a very informative book titled The Long Blue Walk, My Journey as a Philly Cop, and it is available on Amazon. He also hosts his own show on WCEG. It's titled Issues and Answers. Hi, Norm.
Hello, how are you, Doctor?
Our
And Paul.
special guest is Miss Shavett Arthouris. Shavett has a Bachelor's of Science degree in nursing and has worked as an RN for more than 16 years and has served as an RN case manager at various hospitals and clinics. She has taught nursing students. She has provided psychiatric rehabilitation treatment on an assertive community treatment team, and she has served as director of nursing. Hi, Shavett.
Hi, hello, everyone.
Yes, so our topic this evening is a very, very timely topic. The topic is, should police be called for mental health crises? Again, should police be called for mental health crises? Daniel Prude was a 41-year-old African-American male who died after an encounter with the Rochester police. The cause of death on the autopsy report was ruled a homicide, and he died by complications of asphyxia in the setting of physical restraint. Excited delirium and acute intoxication by PCP were contributing factors. He died several days after his encounter with the police in March. The video was just released 5 months after his death. Officers found Prude running naked down the street. He was handcuffed and a spit hood was placed over his head to stop him from spitting. He was then held down for about 2 minutes until he stopped breathing. He died a week later after he was taken off life support. His brother had called 911 seeking help for Daniel because of his unusual behavior. he had actually been taken to a hospital for a mental health evaluation earlier that evening, but he was released after a few hours. And we know this happens, unfortunately, all too often, all too often. His death sparked outrage after his relatives released the police body camera video and written reports that they obtained through a public records request. 7 police officers were suspended a day later. Attorney General Letitia James, a sister, said she would form a grand jury and conduct an exhaustive investigation into Prude's death. The Rochester police chief was fired by Mayor Lovely Warren, also a sister. The police chief, LaRon Singletary, and his entire command staff then announced that they were resigning. In a federal lawsuit, Prude's family alleged that it took more than 90 seconds for officers to notice that he had stopped breathing because they were chatting and making jokes at his expense. The lawsuit argues officers used force against Prude at a time when he obviously posed no threat to the safety of the officers or anyone else. Mr. Prude was in the midst of an acute manic psychotic episode. He was unarmed, he was naked, and he was suffering. He needed help. The union officials of the police department said that the officers were following their training. As I said, his death has been ruled a homicide. So what are your thoughts on this whole situation and police being called for mental health crises? Anyone who wants to speak up first?
Okay, I'll jump in.
Okay.
I find this very alarming. Those who read my book, The Long Blue Walk: My Journey as a Philly Cop, very near the beginning, there's an incident where we had a call to come to a house where a mentally disturbed person was armed with a knife. When we entered the house, the man had a butcher knife. There were about 8 police officers who responded to this location. The man was he was violent, he was incoherent, but the one thing he kept repeating is, anybody touches me, I'm going to kill him. And what we did then, and I was a rookie, so I was basically in an observant posture, is that there was de-escalation that went on. No one challenged this man's space. There was no yelling, no shouting, no giving any specific orders. Every effort was made to calm this man down, calm him down, one, and to distract him. And this whole process took about 20 minutes. But what happened is we were able to disarm this man. He was not injured. No police officers were injured. And the situation was handled properly. And a lot of this was because of training that we received at the police academy and in-service training about how to deal with people who are in mental crisis. Now, every situation is not absolute, but when you have numbers, and today the police have more tools than we had to use in my day, because all we had were nightsticks, billy clubs, and guns. But there has to be training. I believe there's still training going on, and that what we're finding now is certain officers are forgetting about that training or disregarding that training and taking what they perceive to be the easy way out, which is number one, treating that person as if not as if they're mentally disturbed, but if they're totally coherent. And I say that because you see on videos a lot of yelling back and forth and giving orders to people who obviously aren't capable of reacting to that type of instruction. So you have to take another way. And I think that, sad to say, that there's still some evil cops out here who have no regard for life, particularly the life of African Americans. I don't want to be running off, but just a couple of years ago, we had an incident here in metropolitan Georgia where a Caucasian man came out of the house with a gun, threatening to shoot anybody that came by, especially police. Police officers responded. The way they handled the situation was there was an attempt to de-escalate, and then they used rubber bullets to disable this man. And then he was arrested. He was not injured. He was arrested. And this was a man with a gun. So, and we also had another incident here in Atlanta where a naked man, former veteran in the Army.
Anthony Hill.
Yes,
That
same
was
thing.
in 2015.
No
March
weapon.
9th, 2015. Yeah.
No weapon,
Right.
just naked.
Mhm.
And he was shot and killed. So these are not only, it's not a question of not being trained.
Mhm.
These are officers who are disregarding the training that they were given.
Paul, I know you have some knowledge about the Anthony Hill incident.
I do.
Uh-huh.
A little more personal knowledge.
Right.
The supervisor on duty happened to be my neighbor of that
Cedric
situation.
Alexander? Cedric? Is that Cedric?
I'm sorry?
Is that Cedric Alexander?
I said the supervisor on duty
Okay.
who supervised the officer and shot Mr. Hill
Mhm.
happens to be my neighbor.
Okay.
So we talked extensively about it.
Mhm.
And like Norm said, unfortunately, bad cops made a bad decision. And this particular incident, that officer did have CIT training.
Mhm.
That officer had so many different options outside of using lethal force. It was unbelievable. He chose not to use any. Like Norm says, he's giving verbal commands to someone who's very clearly it's in a crisis.
Mhm.
I can't, under any circumstances, justify or even try to explain to you why that officer went about killing Mr. Hill.
Mhm.
But the disparity is you have a white suspect in crisis with a weapon.
Mhm.
He was de-escalated. You have an unarmed black suspect naked, and he was shot and killed. Unfortunately, we would never get away from this, how should I say, this race situation that takes us to these incidents. So
you mentioned the CIT training, and I think in the past, it's only like a certain percent of officers that receive that. What was the percentage of officers? Because you said all officers don't receive it.
well, in early 2000, the second President Bush did executive order for law enforcement officers throughout the United States of America. And the executive order stated that 20% of the law enforcement agency personnel should be CIT trained, which stands for Crisis Intervention Team. Those of us who were selected to be CIT officers because the belief we have the demeanor and the patience to be able to de-escalate instead of escalate situations. We were trained in how to handle people with mental health issues, how to observe, not only that, even detect those who are in crisis. I don't know what the percentage is today. Keep in mind, I took CIT training back in 2004. And ever since, especially working with you, Doc, I get to practice that every day, all day. You know, so
Is that training mandated nationwide? Is it a national mandate?
it is nationwide. CIT, just like field sobriety laws. Every state literally has a mandate that's standardized. Unfortunately, again, we can train you all day long. But like Norm said, if you're not capable of utilizing that training or you disregard it altogether, that's when bad things usually happen.
So you, and I understand in the past, you said when you call 911, you can request a CIT team specifically.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Anyone calling 911 because they have a family member, a friend, or even someone they witness who's obviously in some kind of mental crisis or suffering some emotional, especially with domestics if involved. We all know domestics in most cases is a highly charged emotional situation for both parties, and it can get out of hand real fast.
Mhm.
Weapons, drugs, and
Mhm.
other means of substance abuse don't make the situation any better.
Mhm.
But at the same time, the training, and as Norm said, we have tools now that they didn't have back in the day. You know, we can taser the person. We can use aspartans. We can use OC, which is pepper spray.
Okay.
But again, it's up to the officer's discretion to make the right decision.
Okay. Now, this case in Houston, Nicholas Chavez, age 27, in April, he's the one that they shot 24 shots total. And then they felt the 21 shots were justified. They had used, it said 5 stun guns and 6 beanbags to subdue him, but they ended up shooting him 21 times and he was shot in his knees. This is a guy that was trying to kill himself in Houston. This is in April.
Hey, I'm shooting a suspect 21 times.
Yes, 21 times.
I'm sorry. I've seen very few situations in my career, much less in the history of law enforcement, where shooting with someone that many times is justified. And if it is, then you're a poor shot.
Wow.
If they hit them with beanbags and tasers and nothing incapacitate them, I mean, not to be funny, but you know, this guy is probably related to the Incredible Hulk, because I don't know too many people who could stand up to that kind of physical abuse.
Well, this term that they use called excited delirium. I don't know if that's something that they teach you in your training, but it's something that law enforcement officers use in the emergency rooms. It's not accepted by the American Medical Association or the American Psychiatric Association. And like the guy in Colorado, Elijah McClain, what they ended up doing was giving him a shot of ketamine, and he died from the shot of ketamine. So they use the term excited delirium to justify some of the actions that they take. It's a term that they use called excited delirium. And they said the same thing in the case with Proved, that he had excited delirium as well. It's a term, like I said. Have y'all heard that term? Or?
Well, let me ask a question. And this is specific for you and Shavett, since y'all are the medical professionals. Regardless of what someone is going through mentally, if we subject the body to such punishment and abuse, such as beanbags, rubber bullets, tasering, wouldn't your physical capacity, how should I say, succumb, regardless of what you feel mentally? I mean, pain compliance would force anybody to stop doing what they're doing, right?
Well, they claim in excited delirium that they have this superhuman strength. Is what they claim, that the people possess this superhuman strength. Is what they claim. You know, I don't know. It's not recognized by the American Medical or the American Psychiatric Association.
So it's a drug induced, like someone on methamphetamines or PCP?
Like drugs like PCP, ecstasy, LSD, cocaine, stimulants.
So they're pain blockers. So you won't feel any pain.
Well, I don't know. I know you're hyped up. You're very stimulated. You're more aggressive and hyped up, more physically aggressive.
Well, that may explain the use of deadly force. Not saying that 21 times still need to be. I don't understand the amount of times he was shot, but it does justify deadly force. Right, Shavett?
I mean, in those instances where they have supposedly supernatural, things going on. I mean, I've been a nurse for 21 years now, and I only remember when it was that severe in the beginning of my nursing career, to where there was a patient that was a mental health patient who had taken, I think it was PCP, or it was one particular drug that he was using, and he was shot several times, but he was still standing and still going like he was a superhero. Like it did not, like he was not even shot one time, but he was shot several times and didn't really feel it. or didn't appear to be disturbed by being shot. So, but whether or not it's superhero or this excited, all this new terminology that they're coming up with, to me is just a way to justify
Exactly.
their actions.
Exactly.
That's my personal opinion.
Exactly. I agree with you. I absolutely agree with you.
Yeah.
Because a lot of my colleagues, African-American psychiatrists, we have this like blog that we respond, and I'm really surprised that most of the people on there saying the police should not be called. And I'm like, what? And I talked about working in an ACT team where we do the 1013 involuntary commitments, and then we call the police all the time, but they're saying the police should never be called. I want you talk about a couple of experiences that you've recently had in our clinic.
Paul or me?
No, you, Shavett, like the experience that you had, with the female and the male.
Yes, I recently have had some experiences, because we deal with the mentally ill, and being able to witness violence, literal violence. And you have to wonder, for you to be in a situation to where, say for instance, you're at someone's home, because we deal with mentally ill where we do home health. So we're actually going to the home to check on the patient, to observe if they're taking their medications or give them their monthly injection and things of that nature. So if you're in a situation to where you are by yourself, you enter a home and there's a patient there who is all of a sudden becomes violent, picking up large items like chairs, furniture, throwing them at you or at whoever else is there, what would you want to do?
Exactly.
Who would you want to call? If they had a gun to your head, a knife to your neck, they're chasing you outside, past your vehicle down the street, what would you want to do? For me, I've been in situations, I want to call someone who's trained.
Yes.
Yes, it's the police I would like to call. And yes, I'm going to ask the 911 dispatcher to please bring someone that has CIT training. I'm dealing with a mentally ill patient that's violent, and I need someone to come fast. But my question to the people on the forum that you are speaking with, your colleagues, if they're in that type of situation, who would they call?
Exactly. And I don't think they are, because some of them are like in academic settings and things like that. And we're arguing back and forth. They said the police should never be called on African Americans. I'm like,
this is not something that's in nursing books.
Exactly.
This is called common sense.
Exactly.
To me. And if you're in those types of situations, the question is, how would you respond? So this particular patient, picked up a chair, and in the process of raging across the room, hit the 8-year-old nephew in the head with the chair, chases the family outside. I mean, and you talk about de-escalating. It was my calm, soft voice with the training that I've had that was able to calm him enough until the police arrived. And prayer.
And you're saying de-escalating the family, because the family was getting ready to
his sister picked up a wooden plank at the trash can and started, charging towards him with it, about to hit him with it. And I had to de-escalate even to calm her, saying, hey, it's okay, calm down, please put that down. It's gonna be okay. The police are on the way. The more we don't say anything, or we're talking calm and softly to him, he will calm down, versus, because the more she did that, the more outraged he became. So once I told her that, she put it down, she was calm, and things kind of tried to get a little bit under control. But the only question I ask is, you have to think about, if you're in that situation and you're at someone's home and a gun is to your head, or a gun is to their head, maybe they want to take their own life, who is it that you would call?
And see, this is where it's important, because you're absolutely right, Shavett. When family members, friends, or whoever call 911 for a crisis situation, dealing with a male, female, regardless, it can even be juveniles. Please advise the dispatcher that this person has mental health issues, have a history, especially if you know it's been formally diagnosed. I advise the dispatcher all the information you can, whether they have weapons, whether they're verbally aggressive, whether they're physically aggressive, have they attacked someone, what means are they are. And the more information you give, the better equipped the officer responding can be to being able to make a decision to handle the situation, resolve it as peacefully and safely as possible. But do let me caution, not all situations will be able to be peacefully resolved.
Correct. I definitely understand that. I definitely
And that's where it's extremely important. Now, I do understand with those who say, well, if it's a mental health issue, well, why not mental health professionals are going to it? Because as Shavett just said, mental health is synonymous with unpredictable.
Exactly.
You don't know what you're walking into. More importantly, what are you going to do when that situation escalates? I have learned not to take it for granted because I have all this equipment on me that I'm handling someone. And I tell you what, I think I have a great rapport with my consumers, with those who are in mental health crisis or have a history of mental health, but I don't ever think that we're that easy that they will not respond accordingly if I let my guard down. I gotta treat them respectfully because it's not the person that I'm personally interacting with, if they're mental health issues.
You and Shavett both said that all outcomes would not be resolved successfully. Can you elaborate more what you mean by that? They may not all be successful.
Well, when I say all outcomes won't be resolved successfully or peacefully, and I'm sure no one can back me up on this, there are going to be situations where deadly force is going to be utilized. And it's not because the officer may want it to. We're all familiar with the term suicide by cop.
Right, right.
This is an individual who's already made their mind up. They want to die today.
Right.
For whatever reason, they're not going to take the traditional route. If they have a weapon, maybe they don't want to shoot themselves. If they have medication, they don't want to overdose. For whatever reason, they determined suicide by cop was a more efficient means of killing themselves than doing it on their own.
True story. True story. I think that's important to note that the two incidents we're talking about with Prude and the young guy in I forget where that's
Nicholas
statement.
in Houston, one in Houston or the one here?
Well, no, not the one at not the one in Atlanta. The one where the young boy had problems with people being close to him.
That was Elijah McClain in Aurora, Colorado. Elijah
and those incidents, those males were under control. I mean, the police had them under control. There was no need to take the exceptional means that they did. For instance, giving the guy ketamine in his neck.
Yes.
If you look at the video, there was no reason for that.
Right.
Prude. Yeah, they keep talking about the spit mask. Well, that's necessary. You can still breathe with that. But the other things that they did, totally unnecessary. And again, I go back to something that I've talked about often, and it's true with mentally ill and non-mentally ill people, is that when you fear what you refuse to understand, you take the exceptional means. And I write about this in my book, about a large segment of police officers, their only interaction, if you call it that, with African Americans is what they see on television until they come on the job. And what they hear is that we're violent people, we have no self-control, no discipline, and if you don't go to the exceptional level, you might get hurt. So you see, for some people, seeing a mentally ill person walking around with no clothes on, that's threatening. That's threatening. And it is stupid to think that you can handle one-on-one. And that's what happens a lot. They try to handle a lot of these people with mental crisis one-on-one. And you can't do that. Sometimes you have to back off. Sometimes you have to use your wits and try to de-escalate even the most violent people. And I've been around some very, very violent people. And like I'm sorry, Miss Arthouris said, your voice and the tone of your voice can do exceptional things. I don't care. You can have minimal training, but if you don't give in to yelling, don't give in to panicking or making sudden movements, you can de-escalate a lot of things. But as Paul said, everything, it doesn't work all the time. It'll work a lot of times. And there are times when exceptional violence may be necessary, but by and large, we should be able, and I know when I was an officer, all of us were trained. There was no 20%, that was everybody.
Everybody was a training.
Everybody had to be trained.
Wow.
Yes, that was back in my day.
And how long was the training? How many hours?
Well, I can't tell you what hours. I know we had training in the academy, and there was also in-service training after that, which is probably, if it's in service, it's probably an 8-hour tour, 8-hour session. But the problem is, and I know how police departments work, when there's an order that goes out and says 20% are trained, those 20% who are trained, with a few exceptions, they're going to look at people who have absolutely no interaction with people on the street.
Yeah.
I have a question. You say 20%. So why is it that when police officers are trained to be police officers, why wouldn't it be 100% being CIT trained? Because when I call 911, various officers are going to show up. They don't know if it's a mentally ill patient or if it's just someone who's not mentally ill, or what situation they're walking into. So it's a numbers game. The odds of a police officer being a police officer for 10 or 15 or 20 years and not running into a situation with a mentally ill patient is almost slim to none.
Correct.
Which
I'm
means,
glad you asked that.
which means all officers, in my eyes, should be CIT trained.
I agree.
Okay, ladies. Just like being a specialized unit, crisis intervention was considered a specialized training. And Norm is right on one thing. When initially started, they wanted to give it to command staffs or supervisors, the ones least likely to make contact with the individual as a first responder. Well, going back to what you said, Shavett, to be CIT certified is 40 hours. To add another 2 weeks to any academy is time and money, especially when the agency is trying to get boots on the ground as quick as possible. Unfortunately, maintaining 20% of your agency people CIT certified, it's kind of really hard to do, especially with people coming and going. Those retiring, those resigning, going to another agency. People you train somebody one day and they gone the next. That's one of the biggest problems too. 40 hours to commit to training each and every officer. And a lot of agencies where there's shortages, we already know we're not going to add this to the academy because we already got 6 months in this police academy. We already know we got another 10 weeks of field training. And to get a specialized training like crisis intervention, they do get a condensed introduction to CIT to a little bit in the academy. But that may be, like Norm said, less than 8 hours out of 6 months of training, you know?
I have a suggestion.
I have
a suggestion.
Yes.
This is 2020.
Absolutely.
And there are lots of ways and suggestions that we could make that happen. We can't go by days of old. We're in a new era, a new day, and a new decade.
I hear you. But understand one thing now.
I understand time and I understand money.
There you go.
So they can graduate at their usual time without the CIT training. But once they graduate, there's Zoom, there's what are we on right now? Whatever,
Zoom.
Zoom right now.
Yeah.
They could take that 40 hours and even spread it out. I don't care if it took them 3 months to do 40 hours. But at some point within a certain time frame, it should be stated and standardized across the US to where if you graduate on a particular date, you have until you have 90 days to complete 40 hours of CIT via Zoom, via whatever way that you put it. But this is a new day and a new time, and technology can make that happen.
Yes,
Glad
I
you
agree.
put that out.
Because
I agree.
I'm with you.
back,
I
Now
agree.
I'm gonna give you the flip side of that.
Oh,
back in the day, the supervisors and the few people that were CIT trained are not the ones 911 gonna call to come to a mentally ill patient. Not into
Now I'm with you on that. Now, as Norm said, you start to understand the functioning of a law enforcement agency. And it's dysfunctional on every level, because those who most opt to have contact with people on a regular basis don't get the training until it filters down. Those who will not make any effort to make contact, even if they were in a position to, are the ones who get trained. And why I'm going to make that a little more reasonable for you to understand, I know so many officers who went to CIT, yet still don't have contact on a public in any level. And unfortunately, even those who have, they don't interact enough to utilize to get good at it. It's one thing to send somebody to a training and say, okay, now you're CIT certified. Perfect case, Mr. Hill in DeKalb County. In Crisis, he was murdered by an officer who was CIT certified, but yet absolutely positively did not have the aptitude nor the demeanor to be anybody's crisis intervention officer. That was a perfect case of just sending somebody to training without even making sure that this person is qualified to be able to utilize this training. There probably would have been 10, 15, 20 more officers who were better qualified, who should have been with, and Mr. Hill would be alive today.
Here is
because he was
the
the only
danger.
one. They only send out one officer, right? Don't you usually have more than one officer in a situation like that?
Well, the officer that responded, Mr. Hill, he got the primary call. If he was working that zone and that beat, then he would get that call. Automatically, you know, you will have a partner, someone in that zone who will automatically be riding to you as primary backup. But we don't know what the scheduling was that day, how many officers they had working that shift. So right now we have to think that they were running short on that shift. They only had an officer, they had other calls backed up. And unfortunately, the officer that responded to Mr. Hill failed to utilize good judgment, because even if he felt threatened, he should have backed off, got his patrol car, pulled out to a safe distance, observed Mr. Hill, and waited till backup units got there. He made a quick decision to be judge, jury, and executioner all in the few moments that he arrived on scene.
Correct.
Because they said that he had a police baton, pepper spray, but he chose the firearm first. He had a taser, police baton, and pepper spray. Officer Olson, that's who it was. He had all of those things.
And that showed you totally abandoned your training, and you made your decision based on your fear.
I think there's one scary thing that Paul just said. And he said that this officer did not have the demeanor or the character to carry out what he would have learned in CIT training. The problem with that is he didn't have the character or the training or demeanor to even be a police officer. And he wasn't a new cop. He was a veteran. So the observation that Paul just made, his supervisors and his co-workers had to be aware of. And that's problematic. And that's why people are calling for these police reforms, because we need to weed out these people who have these demeanor problems. There shouldn't be, well, he's got 10 years on, we're going to be nice to him and we're going to do this. No, if his character is not up to par, if he doesn't have the temperament to be up to par, the temperament to make good decisions when you're under duress, then you can't be a cop. It's really that simple. It's really that simple.
So should that be determined at the time that they enter the academy? Was through a battery of psychological tests, just interviews, things like that?
Well, they do psychological tests, but you know what? I don't think they give the psychological tests. And there's a video about that. It's on the internet that are actually relevant to the job. What happens is that there's no down the road observation. I wrote about in my book about a police officer who was totally mentally incapacitated in my district. I think he wound up serving like 10 years at least 10. And everyone knew that this man was mentally unfit to be a cop. And it wasn't until his behavior became so bizarre that the city was on the verge of being sued, because there were several complaints about this guy. He would do things like he would laugh when there's nothing to laugh about, or he would talk to himself, or he would just come up with nonsensical things. And he was protected and coddled. And fortunately, he didn't kill anybody. He wound up killing himself.
Oh.
But it's a sad situation, and I don't think that his situation is unique. I think that throughout the country, there are police officers who are mentally unfit, who are coddled and protected by their supervisors and by the police organizations. And we, the public, are at their mercy.
So what mechanism is there to identify those types and to remove them? Is there a mechanism for that?
Well, I think the first step towards that, and I hate to say it, was the getting rid of what they call sovereign immunity, which is that you can't sue police officers and you can't sue the city or state where they commit acts or they make it very difficult. I think that once you begin to have legislation that increases the accountability of officers, that's when the problem starts. And I know we have a problem in Atlanta where there's a lot of resignations going on. But I think that those officers who are leaving because of what's been happening here, they probably need to go. They probably need to go.
Someone just made a comment and says, "You're right, Paul. Sorry, people, I'm not buying that police brutality is out of fear. In my humble opinion, police brutality is out of pack mentality and narcissism." Someone just made that comment.
We used to call it the John Wayne syndrome back in the day.
Someone else said, "Both of my parents were Chicago PD. They expressed the same sentiment as Mr. Carter said, with the addition of white rookies that didn't understand Black culture, and those trained under Black cops succeeded. Those that trained under bad cops became sour and rotten."
Yep. Yes. I could tell you a factual story. I don't want to use the police officer's name, but we're in contact now. He praises me continually, and he's white, that I trained him, because he says often that it could have gone the other way. They're eventually going to make a movie about this guy, but that's in the works right now. But he often says that he could have gone a totally different way if he had trained under other police officers, most of whom were Caucasian.
Well, I just think that the times that we're living in right now, and, recently within the last, 12 to 24 months, all the people that have died that shouldn't have or didn't have to die at the hands of these so-called bad cops. Paul, I think about, having life insurance just in case. I took physics and chemistry in nursing school and feel like I never really had to use it, but I had to have it. We have health insurance just in case. I'm not saying that, cops that have certain duties where maybe they're, traffic cops or, cops that aren't going to be called when 911 comes out. But just in my opinion, we know that some people, the bad apples are just going to be bad and we have to continue to weed those out. But in my opinion, also to kind of help with this, I think in some way, shape, form, or fashion that, we need to just still have people that are those that go out when 911 is called. I still think that they should have, training, just in case, just like we have, all this other insurances and life insurance and dental insurance and take things that we, may not need at that time, but that one moment when you need it, you're so glad that you had it. And I think it really help and alleviate some of the issues as it relates to, cops going out with, and having to handle situations with mentally ill patients.
And I think that Nurse Arthouris brought up a very good point that I was going to bring up, that it's no excuse that the academy is 6 months or whatever long, because the in-service training portion of that is available. If you had 2 hours in the beginning of your training at the police academy, with the understanding that you were going to have specific periods to have to go get 2-hour blocks of training or an 8-hour block of training. This can be done. And I'm sure that if your government leaders petitioned the federal government and your congressperson, that funding could be found to pay for that.
Exactly.
I remember when I was a young police officer, a lot of the training that we went through was paid for by the LEEP Act. That's the Law Enforcement Educational and something Act. I forget the whole but what that does is that provided funds for training, for federal funds for mandated training that was mandated by the government, and there was federal funding for it. Around the 1980s, the program got to be abused and the funding stopped and it was never reestablished. But we need to have our Congress people petition the government and bring up legislation that would provide the funding that we would need for crisis intervention training, not for just the 20%, because that gives the police department an out. What we need is 100% involvement.
I wholeheartedly agree.
And after they receive their certification, there needs to be mandated refresher courses.
Right, because just like in medical, for nursing, I think it's every 12 months or 24 months, there's certain courses that you have to just do a quick 30-minute refresher on, certain things in certain, areas, just to keep you abreast upon, any changes or, keep you up to speed, with that particular area or topic or what have you. And, it could be the same thing. A refresher could probably take them maybe, 4 hours here or there every 12 months or something like that, or I don't know, whatever that looks like. It can, all my point is that it can happen.
Yeah.
As a post-certified instructor, when I come into agencies and do what we know as in-service training, whatever training I am hired by that agency to perform is they consider a priority for their officers to have, especially if they designated certain officers for certain training. But CIT I hold dear to my heart because that is what my niche is. And I absolutely love working with that mental health community. One of the things I gotta stress, we keep using the term bad apples. Keep in mind, I see more bad departments than I see bad officers. And the reason I say this, the culture of the agency really dictates the attitude of the officers as individuals. You have those who are going to come out and say, hey, you know what? I do have a sense of obligation, morals, honor, and I'm going to do the right thing. But most of them are going to do what they can get away with because the department say, yeah, that's how we do business. This is how we handle this. We got to change the culture of agencies, because keep in mind, for every bad officer we call a bad apple, keep in mind this department selected that person out of dozens of applicants. And some of them might have been better officers than the one they actually hired. But once upon a time, Black officers, we were literally weeded out the process at 3 times the rate of white officers, anyone else. Even if we were better qualified, better educated, and definitely had a better means of aptitude toward the job than the one they hired. So again, I stress, let's not look at individual officers and look for problem. Look at agencies and say, this is the problem. Look at that command staff. Look at your local leaders, from your mayors, your city councilmen, to your city manager, whoever they are, and see who are they putting in these positions. Because at the end of the day, it's the culture of that agency that's dictated by the leadership that runs that community. And that will tell us how well we're going to be in the quality of officers we get on these streets. And again, I know this is an election year, but people need to pay probably twice as much attention who they elect to be their local leader versus who they put in the White House, because that makes a difference in your life right here, right now.
Here's a comment from Facebook. Survey local, state, and federal use of confiscated money. It doesn't seem to circle back to LE to
Law
be
enforcement.
for training. Oh, and body cams.
What happens is a lot of that money is used for equipment, and it's up to the department how they want to use that money. I don't think that, and I know what you mean by confiscated money, like from narcotics units and thefts and things like that. That is not the type of money you need. It's going to take
Consistent money.
Right. You want, what you need is federal funding. It can happen if you have the will and the government leaders, the congressmen, your senators to push for that. It can happen. It happened before, and we have to stop taking the easy way out. And there's no easy fix. It's going to cost money for that type of training. CIT training needs to be mandated 100% throughout the country. And those departments who elect not to take advantage of that, they need to be punished, because there's other federal money that they get. And if you don't accept this money, then we're going to pull, don't accept this program, we're going to pull this money from you. And that's how you do it. Money drives everything.
Absolutely.
Money drives everything.
And keep in mind, confiscated money. People make the mistake of thinking that police departments are bringing in hundreds of $millions on confiscations and drug seizures. Not even remote.
No.
Excuse me. Not even close. That money actually, even on a good drug bust, say you get $1 million on a traffic stop, drug money, 10% go to the federal agency, 10% go to the state agency, 80% stays within that agency. And you don't want that happening on a regular, because you have these small and mom and pop departments now start policing for profit. The more stops we make, the more money we confiscated, the more we can add to our budget. That means traffic enforcement and speed traps, people. Literally, let's call it what it is. They more worried about writing tickets and getting confiscating property and money than they are about protecting your neighborhoods, keeping burglaries down, protecting kids, community policing. You don't want aggressive traffic enforcement for the whole purpose of enriching a jurisdiction versus you want to make sure that when you leave your house, work in the morning, that you're going to come back to your house in the same shape it was when you left. It's important to be careful what you ask for at this point.
You're right. I once got a speeding ticket in a small town in Georgia. This is like more than 10 years ago. And the ticket was like over $200. And I was looking for the courthouse, but it was actually a room in the back of the fire station. And
Wow.
I was on a contest, but the only people in there were me, the judge, and the officer. And we were like at a folding card table. And I went to take out my checkbook. They said, we don't take checks. Credit card, we don't take credit card. I said, what do you take? They said cash only. So I had to go find an ATM, come back with the cash, paid them the cash. I said, what about a receipt? They had one of those little printed books that they tore out the thing and handed me. It never showed up on my record or anything, but it's $200 cash that they wanted.
Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, it was cash only. Yeah.
Policing for profit is very real.
Exactly, right.
And in this 21st century, you know, I hate to think that agencies who are still operating like that, but
Yeah.
That doesn't sound legal.
Right. You know, cash only, no credit card, no check. And it never.
apparently you never watched the Dukes of Hazzard, have you?
That just means no trace. This
Exactly.
never even happened.
Right. Yeah. No credit, no check, cash. No. I'm like, okay. So,
Wow.
yeah.
I think that there's I read an article that was in the Washington Post that I'd just like to bring out in reference to our conversation. It was written by a guy by the name of Pete Early, and it's real short. And it says, to reduce police interactions, we must rethink our involuntary commitment criteria that demands an individual pose an immediate danger to themselves or others before intervention. Waiting until someone is dangerous is a recipe for police force and arrest.
Wow, you said a mouthful there, because you're right, because that's part of what we do in the clinic. We have to do here in Georgia, it's a 1013, which is an involuntary commitment, and the criteria, right, they have to be dangerous to themselves or someone else, and that's the criteria that we have to go on.
And see, that brings about what Shavett said, where the problem is. You know, we make the mistake of thinking that, especially in a mental health issue, the average person on outside looking in, well, that problem will resolve itself. That problem is going to escalate. Even right now, Doc and Shavett, you can support me on this one. Even as we deem a consumer to be digressing to the point they will be dangerous, unfortunately, all stakeholders, including the institutions that we send due to 1013, send this consumer to be stabilized, tell us, well, as far as they're concerned, for their protocol, that person is stabilized. And you send them right back, even more deadlier than when we took them there. This is where I'm a little confused among medical professionals, why there's not a standardized level of stabilization for individuals in crisis.
Like the same guy that Shavett talked about. He had been to the hospital and they sent him back. The same one that was throwing the chairs. He had just been to the hospital and they sent him back.
Yeah, because this just happened literally last week. And 2 weeks prior to that, one of our team members was at the home. He was violent, you know, called 911. He went to the hospital and I think he was released within 24 hours because he suffers from manic bipolar, I think it is.
Right.
And so with me, I saw the violent behavior, but as soon as the blue suits got out the car, he was you would have thought he was as normal as you and I.
Yeah.
So I had to explain to the police officers, it was like 4 cars that came. Listen, do not, I repeat, do not believe what you see. The calmness that you see right now was not the calmness that I just witnessed.
Absolutely.
And I even had to, you know, deliberate with the hospital, talk to the hospital staff, you know, on the floor where he was, and like, listen, he was there 2 weeks prior. this is what I saw. He may seem calm right now, but he was very manic. And that's the reason why he's actually still there. But, you know, again, we had a patient, maybe 2 or 3 months ago that I was hit in the head. And wow, it was, and she's like 6'2", I'm 5'1". And long story short, she ended up, you know, going outside, running down the street, and she kind of stopped and started talking to herself. So we had called 911. So by the time the police came, I, you know, pointed to where she was. This patient put both of her hands up to the cops, like she wanted to fight them and like, let's go, you bad? Come on, what you here for? She took her fist and hit him directly in the middle of his chest. And both of the officers just looked like, is this happening? And then there's a lady across the street filming all of this on her phone. And she starts running down the street. It was a crazy day. It was a really crazy day. So, you know, my point is we just never know what they're gonna do. But those officers, the fact that they were calm, they were, you know, CIT trained, they knew how to de-escalate, even though he would have had every right to shoot her, literally. But thank God he didn't. And we praised him for, you know, continuing to de-escalate even after being hit.
You're right, because if it had been a different officer, it could have gone a different way.
Yeah, definitely could have. Definitely could have.
Wow.
I think that also that we need to have people revisit, and this is one of my pet whatever, but I really get into this. A lawyer by the name of David Furliger, I don't know whether you're familiar with him, but he's from Philadelphia. And in 1974, he litigated the landmark Haldeman versus Pennhurst State Hospital School and Hospital case. Pennhurst was a place where they used to house mentally ill people. And he went on for about 20 years in litigating these type of cases. And that resulted in the mental health policies or mental health crisis policies that we have today. And he's still touring the country talking about this issue. And I think that we need to have legislation that revisits this, because as the other writer says, the criteria for committing people who are in mental crisis is so stiff.
Yes.
And it's stiff because of abuses that happened in the past. And you just can extrapolate that to what's happening with our police departments now. It's because of abuses that were tolerated in the past that people are fed up with. And what's going to happen is there's going to be things that are going to come down. They're going to be overly restrictive on police officers. We have to be careful about that. But let's get back to mental illness. We really need to have, again, our government leaders really look at this issue, not on a local level, because it needs to be universal. It needs to be national. On a national level, we need to revisit the whole way that we handle this, because if you don't, you're going to have more people killed, and there's no bringing back somebody who's dead who could have been saved by other means. There's no bringing them back, and it's sad. Mental illness is a human condition. It's been with us ever since we've had human beings. But here in 2020, we should be able to better deal with those issues.
There was a study in 2016 that said 1/3 to 1/2 of people killed by police nationwide had some type of disability, either mental illness, autism, or developmental disability. 1/3 to 1/2 of people killed by police. So
that's consistent. I just read a study today, and that was from 2019, and it's still the same. It's about the same figure.
One I think that's over. I just want to bring up, like, So in the clinic where we are, where myself, Shavett, and Paul are, as we know, we do 1013s, and then the officers transport them. But just recently now, we were told by the major of the local police district where we are that the officers will no longer be transporting our 1013 patients. So because of liability reasons.
Yeah, that's a knee-jerk reaction to all the criticism that they receive. That's what that is. This is the I'll show you type of action. And that has to stop. That really has to stop. And it's only going to stop when we sit down, our police leaders, our government leaders, our mental health professionals, sit in a room and have a conversation. And until that happens, there's never going to be any resolution. And right now, people.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Well, I just want to add on to you and say that's the slippery slope side of saying we want to send mental health professionals to a 911 call with someone in mental health crisis. Going back to what Shavett said earlier, when there's violence, that is the priority of this crisis, we're in trouble because your local agency said, well, you have mental health professionals to deal with that. So you deal with it. Going back to what you said, Norm, that now becomes a predicament for everybody. But then we have the individuals saying, well, police shouldn't be there in the first place because they're not mental health professionals. I think one of the problems we have right now is too many people on all sides who consider themselves professionals who can't even come up with a mitigated standardization of response, but they quick to tell each other what they can't do or what they shouldn't do. There's got to be a common ground. Like Norm said, take everybody who consider themselves of some kind of professional who has the means to make decisions, put them in a room and let them duke it out. Some of them may have pre-existing conditions for all I'm concerned, because everybody's a little crazy to a certain extent. When things get emotionally charged and you have a group of people who have to come together and make a decision, and these could be the most intelligent people of this subject matter with all the experience and training and education, it amazes me how so-called a group of experts can't agree on the simplest of subjects and resolve an issue that's nationwide.
I agree.
I agree.
The mayor of San Francisco, London Breed, who's also a sister, she's formed a steering committee to look for alternatives to calling the police for mental health crises. So she's formed some kind of steering committee where they're going to look into that. And that seems to be, like when I look at my colleagues, they favor alternatives, but like, honestly, I don't know what the alternatives could possibly be, because I would want to call the police, you know, because.
The one thing that they, you know, really don't need to do is equalize quality for quantity. They don't need to put, you know, that the bottom line is I can just almost guarantee you that the people that want alternatives, you can say a lot until you're faced with that situation.
Right.
That's the bottom line. Until you've been in a room, especially like us, we actually go to the home and we pretty much go alone. You have no idea until you're faced with that situation.
Exactly.
And you don't.
This is what I don't understand.
You want someone that's trained, that comes to your rescue, not someone that, you know, got a two week certification or whatever it is. You want someone that's really trained in this particular field.
Now, Shavett and Doc, why can't myself or one of my officers actually escort y'all to home visits? Because I still don't understand why that is against current policy and procedure for the organization that we work for.
We used to do that.
It depends on, like, you've had CIT training. It depends on the type of organization they're talking about. It depends on the type of training that they've had and how long of a training. How long were they trained? there's a lot of variables there. We know for the police academy that across the board, pretty much that they're, they're trained a certain way, but the question is, these alternative companies that they're talking about, who are they? What training?
Yeah.
Where do they
Because
come from?
when you do those home visitations, Shavett,
Did they do a background check? I mean, you're dealing with I don't know. Who are you dealing with? What training do they have? I want to be secure in knowing whoever comes to me and I'm dealing with a violent situation that they're capable of doing what I need them to do.
absolutely. Because I really wish we could, like for personally, when you or the other members of medical staff make home visit, I think it should have been imperative for myself, one of my officers, to escort y'all in and out, especially when we have volatiles, when we know in crisis. And all I could do is get the reports after the incident and go, wow, why won't they not allow us to be able to go hand in hand? You have the medical personnel, then you have the officer there to de-escalate, to assist in any type of violence. It's like we're lazy on between getting that service and whatever local law enforcement agency may have to respond. Or if we're in the right position at the right time, there shouldn't be a response because we're already there to prevent any kind of violence.
Well, I think that when I was a police officer, we, if requested, we went in to assist people. A lot of times they worry about the uniform inflaming the situation, but if that's a concern, you can always have the police officer sit outside, and it would makes it easier for the caregiver or the worker, the mental health worker, to be able to alert the police that there's a problem inside, that they need to intervene. But to absolutely have a policy where there's no interaction or no assistance rendered in those type of situation, that shouldn't happen. And I don't want to hear about liability issues because that's irrelevant. The liability issue is a mental health caseworker going in there and getting killed.
Yes.
That's the liability issue.
Absolutely.
Because one of the guys did say that, why can't we transport the people, when he said that they wouldn't be because of liability? Why couldn't our staff transport? And that's not, acceptable.
No. Well, again, and I hate to say this, right now there is a national collective hate of police officers and police intervention in anything. And unfortunately, that's sad. And the people who are promoting that and promoting these solutions that cannot possibly work in a real world have no idea of what goes on with mental health patients. They have no idea what goes on with police officers, and they're coming up with these outlandish policies that won't work. And the only thing that will work is when your mental health people, your doctors, your police officers, your district attorneys sit down and meet and come up with policies that are workable. Until that happens, nothing will happen. Everything will stay the same. We'll have this finger pointing back and forth, and people will die unnecessarily.
Somebody has a question. Is it standard procedures for the police union to support officers if they are right or wrong?
Yes.
Oh, it is.
Yes. Yes. Because as a bargaining agent, this is what they do. This is what they're paid for. And their responsibility as a bargaining agent is to see to it that police officers who are accused of wrongdoing receive equitable justice or receive justice, that they aren't just bowled over by false complaints and whatnot. But I've been personally involved, and I write about this in my book again, where I made a complaint against police officers who were actually doing criminal behavior, and I was being harassed because of it. And what happened is the Fraternal Order of Police told me, we have a conflict of interest, so we can't support you.
Wow.
So I was out there on my own. So they're selective about it, but I think that when you have, and this is, I'm involved in conversations with police officers as of even yesterday and today, is that you have police fraternal organizations and the police benevolent associations come out and backing people with policies that work against the African American community. And there's no penalty for that. And if you follow me on Facebook, one of the suggestions that I made, and we did this in Philadelphia many years ago, is the group of a Black police organization threatened to pull all the membership out of the Fraternal Order of Police if the Fraternal Order of Police didn't stop backing certain actions. And that changed things. And we have the power to do things like that. Because generally speaking, the fraternal police organizations, the bargaining units, they are all run by and led by people who are not African American. I've never seen an African American head of a national police organization.
Really?
And they never work, their policies are never in keeping with the needs of African American police officers, even. Because you have to remember, and I'm going back to the beginning of my career, is that they campaigned against equitable hiring for minorities. They campaigned against women being hired as police officers. So they have consistently been working against the interests of minority communities, even when even minority police officers, women, those agencies, they say this thing, we're all blue. No, they're not all blue. And then when you buy into that, as many police officers have, you set yourself up for disaster. So going back to police, yes, they do. They always seem to be on the wrong side of us. And when I say us, I'm talking about African American citizens. They seem to always be on the wrong side of us on the premise of that they're supporting police. But when you have police officers doing what they did to Mr. Prude, and you have the Fraternal Order of Police or their Police Benevolent Association coming out and saying they followed policy, that's bogus. You know that's wrong. And sadly, active African American police officers are prohibited from saying anything publicly about that.
You know what, to piggyback on what you're saying, Norm, as I'm listening to you, I gotta admit, and I gotta share this to our WCEG family, as well as Shavett and Dr. Wanzo. We have a Black organization that's not a union. I don't know how much they lobby, but NOBLE, which stands for the National Order of Black Law Enforcement Personnel. And it's sad to see NOBLE has not taken the lead to say not only to agencies, but cities and jurisdictions that have discriminated against Black law enforcement officers, have that created policies against African American community, that have really put us in a position where we enforcing the law, but we just as much a victim of that law ourselves at any given time. They have never stepped up and said, hey, listen, we demand change. We are a collective agency of law enforcement officers nationwide that has come together, and we want to, and we're demanding change within our community, within our agencies, with policy and procedure to make it better for everyone. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. I was just going to say that I challenged them on social media 2 weeks ago. I challenged NOBLE. I have sent letters to NOBLE. NOBLE has ignored me.
Wow. Not even as much as open a dialogue. Let's get together and talk about it. Okay, listen, what can we do? Because NOBLE is a national organization for Black law enforcement.
Yeah.
I have not seen NOBLE respond nor make a comment or make any effort. nationwide to assist, resolve, mitigate, or stand up and say, hey, listen, we understand the plight of both sides. Maybe we can help mediate, do something to bring racial understanding, cultural diversity, most importantly, showing that, hey, you know what? It's not easy being Black and being an officer, more or less as it is to be Black and be a citizen. I think Noble has a lot of power. It's just refusing or afraid to exercise it.
And for those of you who don't know, Noble is the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives.
There's a question and a comment about Trump. The comment is, it appears Trump supporters seem to support police officers and anti-Black Lives Movement groups, and they want to know if any panelists are Trump supporters. So here's my answer to that. I don't know if you can see, but my shirt says Biden-Harris 2020. So that's my answer.
And these are the opinions
more than a
of
t-shirt
the
to get them
hosts of
elected.
WCEG and not WCEG Network.
Right. Are any panelists Trump supporters? I don't know why they asked, but someone wants to know if any panelists were Trump supporters.
Well, I think we're now being misdirected from the issue at hand. Sadly,
saying the Breonna Taylor case, they really tried to bash her integrity instead of seeking justice.
That's a common tactic to discredit someone.
Right. True.
Okay. Wow, this has been a very interesting and lively discussion. I guess we've got about 8 minutes left. So I'm going each person, if panelist, if you have anything in particular that you'd like to, that you really would like to say or start to the discussion. Start with Paul. Do you have anything in terms of what we've been talking about that you really feel people should know?
I can make it quick. Defunding the police is not the answer, because now we're going to allow crime to be more prevalent, and we're going to have less qualified officers out there to protect us in our communities. In regard to the mental health community, we have to demand more from our local leaders as well as the agencies themselves, because as long as we tolerate and fail to understand that all stakeholders are responsible for contributing to resolving this matter, we're not going to succeed on any level.
Okay, Shavett, any words that you have or thoughts in terms of this whole discussion that we've been having?
Well, it's been, I think, a very good discussion, and I'm hoping, like Norman said, that we can somehow eventually come together with our, governors or whoever, those individuals be, where we can really sit down and talk about it and hash this out. These are really trying times that we're living in, and according to who you're supporting, so to speak, people are now afraid of who's protecting us and going out and getting their guns and all of that. And now they're saying, I'm going to protect myself. So things can really continue to spiral out of control if the country doesn't get this under control.
Absolutely. Okay, Norm, do you have any thoughts?
I'll just be quick. Number one, we have a lot of people running for office who are coming through the WCEG network. I'm sure some of them are listening. They really need to consider creating or establishing funding for police officers for additional training when dealing with crisis intervention training. It's exceptionally important. And if you want to talk about police reform, don't just give lip service to it, give it your support and provide the funding to have that done.
Okay, thank you. This has been a very lively and powerful discussion, and we've gotten so many Facebook comments and questions. Let's see, the comment just came through. Until we respect the lives of all people and see them as humans without prejudice, we will never heal. Someone just made that comment. So
yes,
I
agree.
Yeah.
We all agree.
Yes.
Let's just pray 5 years from now, we're still not having the same conversation without any improvement in the situation.
Well, as the old saying goes, if we keep our hands on the plow and keep on pushing.
Mhm.
It'll happen. But what's happening in this country is we have a very short attention span when it comes to things like this. And we yell and scream about it for a little while, and then it goes away. And then it revisits itself like 5, 10 years down the road. So we need leaders in office, and we need us right here, to continue to be active, to continue to shout out about what's going on here, and maybe something will get done.
Mhm.
And I'll add that all of you listeners out there, go VO vote.
Yes. Yes.
Mhm. But I guess in my heart of hearts, I feel like everything that's happened here in 2020, for some reason, I'm just feeling like things are finally, they are going to change. I just have this feeling that things are going to change. I mean, with the kind of massive demonstrators and protests that we've had, I mean, the positive aspects, it just seems it's been worldwide. So I'm thinking a change is going to come, and a change is in the works. At least that's what I'm hoping and praying for, that a change is in the works.
That's what we pray for. That's what we hope for, Dr. Wanzo. But again, change comes with, you know, leadership. And, you know, the change is not going to come unless we plan it, unless we figure out,
Yes.
you know, what that looks like and start that road to change. It has to be, you know, discussed amongst the right leaders, and, you know, action has to take place.
Right. So I agree, VOTE.
Yes, vote.
But with that action, there have to be consistency. Consistency, to me, is the priority. You can make all the changes in the world. If we're not consistent in mandating it and turn it into a way of life, we'll always find ourselves right back to where we started.
Wow. I'm just so thankful that you all were able to come and to participate. And I just want to thank, you know, each and every one of you for your participation and your contributions. This has been, I hope, very helpful to the WCEG listening audience. We're listening to WCEG, part of the worldwide empowerment group, where we breathe life into the community. And we really thank you so much for tuning in this evening. And again, I thank all of our guests and co-hosts for another informative and lively discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Hey, Norm. Hey, Shavett. Have a good night.
Okay.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.